Hello, friend. Out to play a game. To survive, you must watch the entirety of this video. Maybe even leave a comment. Or a like. Or subscribe. And anyway, the choice is yours. Live or die. Make your choice.
That was weird. I thought I heard Jigsaw's voice before coming in here to make this video. Oh well. It's great to have you here. So today I want to take a look at and break down the original Saw movie. So the original Saw was directed by James Wan and written by Leigh Whannell, and they both worked together on the story, and this was essentially their debut as filmmakers. It had a $1.2 million budget and earned, I believe, around $103 million globally, so quite the success. This was one that they wound up pitching in LA, a short version of the film, and Twisted Pictures ultimately was created and picked this film up as the label. Great success overall with this film. The original was kind of more of that Seven type vibes with that thrillery. I know Saw as a franchise in general is known to be a torture type franchise, but the original was a little bit different. It had a little bit more of that detective-y thriller aspect to it. When it comes to breaking down this film, I have five different categories that I'm going to look at. We have the story or plot, we have the execution or the acting, we have the audio, the visuals, and then the fun factor. So we're going to start off with the story or plot, and that's where I'm going to spend most of the time talking through things. So this came out in around 2004. Really interesting concept to start things off. You have two guys who are trapped in a bathroom together. So you have Adam, who originally wakes up in a bathtub and pulls the plug, water drains, and he hears a noise going on in the background. Suddenly the lights turn on. Dr. Lawrence Gordon across from him in the bathroom, both equally confused as to why they're there, trying to kind of play each other out, figure out what may be going on. Within their pockets, they have these envelopes that have these tapes in them, and that kind of introduces the classic tape recorder that lays out the game of Saw that they use so frequently in the franchise. And in the middle of the floor between both of these two guys is a dead person laying on the ground with a gun in their hand and just blood on the floor all around them. So not really sure how that person got there or what their backstory is. So you have Adam, who's essentially the victim in this story. I don't know how he got selected. I feel like the point of Jigsaw is to pick people who aren't appreciative of their life and they've done some wrong in the past, but I don't know what wrong Adam really did. He was kind of sleazy when it comes to filming and taking photos of people who were doing wrong in their own lives, but I'm not sure really beyond that how Adam really met the code of Jigsaw, but that's neither here nor there. His game is essentially to survive, so he's kind of just a victim also just in his game, so he really gets screwed here. Then you have Dr. Lawrence Gordon, who his goal is to kill Adam before the timer runs out. And if he doesn't, his family is ultimately going to die. You have Adam look over to the toilet, there's a heart on it, digs through it, he winds up digging through the top, and he kind of makes the joke of, oh, I wish I would have started there first instead of going in the main part of the toilet first. Adam kind of provides the comedic humor to the film. Periodically, he'll have very sarcastic lines. He opens up what's in the toilet and finds there's a couple saws in there, and that obviously is the kind of intent of the film or the main focal point. They try to use them on the chains right away. They don't work, and that's where the realization takes place. You know, these aren't meant for the chains. These are meant for our feet. And you have Dr. Gordon, who suddenly says, hey, maybe I remember who may be doing this to us. I've kind of heard in the news of this Jigsaw killer. We get a flashback, really uses that green filter with the flashback, and we have three different detectives. We have Carrie, Singh, and Tapp, and they're just essentially at a crime scene in the past, breaking down what took place here. We have the razor wire trap, which is the first trap that's presented in Saw, where you have this guy who's essentially tasked with getting out of this massive room of razor wires, which seems pretty impossible. He winds up dying in that trap. And we cut back to Gordon. He talks about, oh, Jigsaw killers technically never killed anybody. So it feels kind of weird that Dr. Gordon almost appreciates Jigsaw a little bit here, which may be foreshadowing potentially with the way the franchise goes. We cut to another scene in the past where we have this guy who has petroleum jelly just all over his body. He has a little candle there. There's glass all over the floor. And he is tasked with getting a safe combination from the walls. So the walls are just covered with a bunch of numbers. His task is somehow to get the exact combination that's written somewhere on the walls. This guy gets when it comes to who gets screwed the most in traps in the Saw franchise, this guy may be near the top of the list because I don't know how he had any chance of survival. Just because you would have had to just dumb luck your guess of getting that combination. There's no way he was going to find that on the wall unless there's some deeper meaning to what was ultimately on the wall there. From there, we see that, oh, there was a peephole in there, and they find Dr. Gordon's pen at the scene of the crime here. So kind of gives a backstory of Dr. Gordon's involvement in knowing who Jigsaw is. So you have him brought in by the police in the past as well, where he gives his alibi of, oh, he was actually having an affair at the time. So while not a great story for Dr. Gordon, he does have a justification for not having been at the scene of the crime. And then after he gives that alibi, before they let him go, they wound up having him listen to Amanda's story. So here's where we get introduced to one of the iconic characters of the Saw franchise, Amanda Young, and she relives her story. She has the reverse bear trap, so also one of the most iconic traps in the Saw franchise that's used periodically throughout the franchise. We have her with this bear trap contraption on her head, and her task is to cut open her cellmate's stomach and get the key out and take off the trap of her head before the timer runs out. She runs over, winds up doing it, takes it off, throws it on the ground. She's, bawling essentially, and you have the Billy the Puppet rolling on the tricycle and essentially saying that she values her life now at this point. What we find out is her cellmate actually was alive the whole time. I believe he had some kind of opioid in his system that prevented him from being very lively, but right before she stabs him, you see his eyes open and you're like, okay, this is kind of messed up. This guy just got a really, really tough break. I know Jigsaw's code throughout is supposed to be picking people who did wrong things. We didn't get the backstory of this guy, but he never even got a chance to have any kind of trial. He just immediately was killed there. So I don't know about the full ethics of Jigsaw are shaky at times throughout the entire franchise. But either way, you cut back to Amanda in the police station, and she does feel reborn. So she emphasizes Jigsaw helped her. So she feels like she's gotten the value that was intended for her from this experience. And then we cut back to the bathroom scene to real time, where we have more dialogue between Gordon and Adam, and they get a little bit frustrated at this point. Adam winds up picking up some of the glass on the ground. He realizes there's a two-way mirror in there, and he picks up some of the rocks, throws them at it, breaks it, and sees that there's a camera that's on the other side of the mirror that's been watching him this whole time. Once again, Dr. Gordon kind of appreciates this, saying, you're not going to be able to break that camera. Don't waste your time. This is a well-thought-out man. There's not going to be any loopholes pretty much at this trap, which he winds up pivoting dramatically from that perspective later on. But you cut to them talking a little bit more. He gives his wallet to Adam, showing him his family, just talking about that. We get some flashbacks of him with his family and how he kind of neglected his daughter and his wife a little bit. Obviously, as I mentioned, he has the affair going on. So you have his daughter kind of have this scene where she creepily comes out of bed and goes up to the mom and says, hey, there's a man in my room, in that typical, like, oh, there's a boogie monster in my room situation. Brings her back to Adam going through the wallet of his family and sees that there's a picture in there where his wife and daughter are kidnapped. And he chooses not to share this with Dr. Gordon, keeps it to himself for now. We get the flashback of them ultimately getting captured, his wife and his daughter. So they've been kidnapped. We also cut to Detective Tapp. So one of the detectives I mentioned from the beginning, he is staked outside Dr. Gordon's apartment, and you see him just looking through binoculars, trying to see what's going on there. He sees somebody looking out the window. He kind of gives this funny line like, oh, you're looking for the doctor? I'm looking for him too, or something like that. It's just kind of a funny throwaway line there. Then we see who's ultimately has his family kidnapped in that room, and it's Zepp, who is a hospital worker who was shown earlier in the film, one of the flashbacks where we have Dr. Gordon in the hospital, and surprisingly, they reveal this guy's face at this point in time. They kind of show little glances at first, but then they full-on reveal what he looks like. We also get some flashbacks a little bit further of Tapp looking at the police footage and trying to identify where Jigsaw could be located. He winds up seeing a sign on the wall that he's able to triangulate where that location is, as well as an alarm goes off in the background. They kind of cut the audio a little bit, and they hear this alarm going off. They triangulate when that took place, ultimately find out where Jigsaw's at. And this is, as I said, all taking place in the past. You have him and Singh showing up to Jigsaw's lair. They see a lot of the traps in there, and ultimately they actually see the bathroom trap, which is kind of funny. They see like a smaller version of it, but they wound up running into a victim who's currently in a trap, and they hear some noise. Jigsaw's coming back, and Singh's like, hey, let's bust him. And then Tap's like, no, let's hide. Let's wait for him to come in. So they a little bit different approach there. Jigsaw comes in. They wind up coming out with their guns saying freeze. And Jigsaw starts the trap. They beg for him to turn it off and ask how to turn it off. Ultimately, Singh shoots the trap that stops it. But when he does that, Tap gets a little distracted. Jigsaw pulls out this little wrist blade and just slashes Detective Tap in the throat. He goes down. Jigsaw runs away. Detective Singh follows him and winds up shooting Jigsaw with a shotgun in the back, and Jigsaw falls to the ground. The detective walks up to him, goes through some spider webs. Sure enough, trips a tripwire, and a shotgun from the ceiling just comes down and shoots him straight in the head. And this is a pretty graphic scene. Pretty well done as far as visuals there. You have Jigsaw then get up, walk away. Presumably, I don't know if he had like body armor on, but he obviously got shot but then walked away. Tap shows up slowly afterwards and is just traumatized as to his partner being dead at this point and him feeling partially responsible. We fast forward to him back outside Dr. Gordon's home. So this is now real time. We realize this is why Detective Tap has gone a little bit crazy. He has these newspapers over the wall and stuff because he is fully honed in on catching Jigsaw. He is traumatized by what happened to his partner, and he just can't focus on anything else other than figuring out this situation. We wound up cutting back to the bathroom again. You have Adam looking at that picture that I mentioned that he had of Dr. Gordon's wife and daughter. On the back, it mentions something like X marks the spot, and he tells Dr. Gordon to turn the lights off. Weirdly enough, before Adam says whatever the photograph says, you hear Dr. Gordon say, X marks the spot. I don't know why. That feels like maybe just a slip up in the progression of the story because he's pretty much reciting what's on the back of that photograph without ever having seen it. So small nitpick there. Turns the lights off, sees the X on the bathroom wall, and breaks through that, gets a little box, and in the envelope there is a cigarette, a lighter, a little flip phone, and a note to Dr. Gordon, pretty much saying, hey, you can kill Adam with this cigarette as opposed to having to shoot him. So you don't have to take him out very, violently. You can just find another approach. So he reads that to himself and winds up putting the cigarette in the blood of the dead person in the bathroom and turns the lights off and then tells Adam secretly, hey, pretend to die here. This is going to be legit, so just fake it. Winds up doing that, gives him the cigarette. I don't know how Adam doesn't actually die unless you want to say the blood wasn't really poisoned because he definitely smokes the cigarette that got dipped into the blood. Either way, you have Adam do this very absurd fake death scene where he's like gagging to death, and I don't know if it's supposed to be over the top, but it's very over the top as far as him pretending to die. Then he gets shocked on his leg. So they're chained to these sides of the walls, and one of the chains that's tied to Adam shocks him. And obviously at that point, they faked it. Gordon and him start to distrust each other a little bit. You have Gordon saying, how'd you know that turn the lights off situation? He winds up saying, here, this is how I knew. And then Gordon starts to lose his mind. He freaks out about his family, and he winds up getting a phone call from his daughter. And then he talks to his daughter and talks to his wife a little bit. And from that conversation, his wife says, don't trust Adam. So you have Dr. Gordon now not trusting Adam, bringing up the situation to Adam. Adam says, you're not trustworthy yourself. So you get Adam's story of how he got captured, and really cool use of photography here. And you have Adam in his apartment. He's, just come back from taking pictures of Dr. Gordon, and then he winds up going to sleep, wakes up hearing noise in his apartment. Really funny scene here where you have Billy the puppet laughing. He winds up beating him with a bat, and you kind of hear the puppet dying a little bit. Then Adam gets his camera, and what they do in a lot of video games they do here, where they have him flashing his camera over and over again to provide light to see what's ultimately there. Cool effect there. As you would expect, eventually on one of the flashes, he gets grabbed and winds up being put in the trap, essentially. So Just a really cool visual there. Then you have Adam share the photos of, there were photos in the bag where they got the saws as well that he had taken. Throws them out there and winds up seeing there's a picture with Zepp in the picture. And Dr. Gordon sees that and he ultimately says like, hey, that's Zepp, I know him, he works in my building. Then he also asks, who had you take these pictures? And Adam's just like, oh, it's this guy named Bob. And then he describes him as like this guy who has a slash on his neck. And Dr. Gordon, I guess, kind of knows that happened. I don't know how well he would know the day-to-day life of Detective Tapp to know that happened, but he recognizes, oh, that's the guy who thinks I did it. So realizes who's been telling Adam to take the photos. And then once they see Zepp in the pictures, they wind up thinking it's him. At that point, you hear Gordon say, it's Zepp, essentially. And then you see Zepp's face watching it, and he's like, oh, he caught me. Timer essentially runs out, and you have Zepp approach the family to ultimately shoot them because that was the game. He goes up to them, calls Dr. Gordon. The wife winds up fighting off Zepp and winds up taking the gun, actually. Frustrating thing that always happens in movies, you have the victim who now has the upper hand with the weapon. She gets distracted. Of course, the gun gets taken away again. They start fighting. It shoots a little bit aimlessly. Detective Tapp, who's staking out the house, sees this, and you hear Gordon hear it on the phone. So Gordon's freaking out on his side. Tapp moves in to try to bust him. And you have Tapp run in there. He has a little bit of a shootout with Zepp as well. Zepp winds up getting his leg cut there, and he runs away. Tapp follows him. They chase him in a car. Zepp's essentially going to the bathroom where this took place. Meanwhile, you have Gordon freaking out, not knowing what's happening to his family. He just heard some gunshots taking place, and he goes full crazy finally. He winds up cutting his foot off and frees himself over to the gun from the dead guy in the bathroom, loads it with a bullet, and shoots at him there. Adam goes down, and Gordon is pretty much like, I've done it. Lays there for a little bit. Zepp shows up, and Zepp's like, what is happening here? He just showed up out of the blue. Oh, I guess before that, when Zepp's being chased by Tapp, they wind up having a struggle eventually when they get to the bathroom scene, right before they go in there, and when they're in one of the hallways. They fight off a little bit. Tapp has the upper hand, he knocks him down, but then they struggle for the gun, and Zepp winds up sliding underneath it as it shoots Detective Tapp, killing Tapp there. So Tapp goes down, Zepp proceeds to the bathroom, is surprised what is going on here. He goes up to Adam, kicks him, sees he's dead. He's like, okay. And then he points the gun at Gordon, and he's like, you have to die. And Gordon's like, why? And he's like, it's the rules. Sure enough, right then and there, Adam gets up and starts just taking out Zepp, and he goes full crazy too here. He takes the toilet seat from earlier and just starts beating Zepp to death. And his shoulder's like all messed up. Obviously, he got shot as well, but he also just like hammering this guy with his toilet seat. Gordon goes over to him, comforts him, says, I'm gonna get help. I'm gonna bleed out if I don't get help. You'll be okay. I'll come back for you. And Adam's just kind of sitting there like, all right, well, I guess I'm here now. Goes through Zepp's stuff, goes through his wallet, tries to find out what more information or what help he could find. Then he goes through one of his pockets in his jacket and sees this guy's got a tape player too. Why does he have a tape player if this is the guy who set the thing up? Plays it, and then we get the Hello Zepp, which kicks on the music as well there. Really great scene here. Gives the context of Zepp was part of the game too. Zepp got captured. His goal was to roll out the plans of making sure the game went forward as smoothly as possible, taking care of Gordon's family and making sure to take them out if needed, but then coming to the scene and killing Gordon if he didn't do it as well. As we're getting that kind of realization of, oh, Zepp was part of this game too, you have the dead guy in the middle of the bathroom, gets up off the ground with blood all over him. And at the time this movie came out, this was such a shocking revelation that obviously this is a new franchise. Saw is known for the twists, but this was the very first movie. You had the guy getting up in the bathroom who's been very dead this whole time. And he's the one who's responsible for all this. He is the Jigsaw killer. And we get some a little bit cut of flashbacks, and you realize, oh, this is one of Dr. Gordon's patients. This guy has cancer, he has a brain tumor, And this is how he kind of knows these people a little bit better. And his whole point was, you know, his life is, he's dying. He wants people to appreciate life. So it's a little bit sick and twisted, but that is his morality code or his message as far as why he's doing this. He wants people to appreciate life that don't appreciate it, that take it for granted, that they do bad things in life and they should learn from those experiences. So he gets up off the ground, tells Adam, hey, your key's in that bathtub, but he pulled the plug of that bathtub at the very beginning of the movie. The key went down the drain, so he's just screwed. Grabs a gun, tries to shoot the guy in the middle of the room. John Kramer, the Jigsaw killer, has a little shocker. He shocks him, so he drops the gun, goes to the exit of the room, and does the very iconic now, game over, close the door, and Adam is pretty much just screaming, and we cut to credits. So quite the impactful ending, especially, as I mentioned, Saw is known for their twists, but this was out of nowhere. This one just really shocked people. This movie came out of nowhere, as I mentioned, very low budget, and just wowed people. So I know I talked quite extensively about the story here, but as far as how the story goes, I would rank this really high. I think there's a really great premise here. There's a lot of creativity as far as there was a limited budget with this film. They could only do so much, but having the majority of the movie just take place live in this one bathroom, you have flashbacks of other places as well, but to make that interesting is just extremely well done, and the story was extremely well done. The tie-ins of different characters, and then ultimately the reveal at the end, the twist, was amazing. So I'll say really high regard for the story as far as the creativity and the plot and the idea of it. So moving on to the execution. So this includes things like acting or just decisions made throughout the film. I would say I'm probably neutral in this one just because the acting can be questionable at times. They filmed this really quickly. There was a limited budget, so understanding that. You have your main characters. You have, obviously, as I mentioned, you have Adam, who's Lee Winnell, who is the one who wrote the story. It's, I believe, his first acting gig, so pretty good job as far as that. There are times where he does a little bit too, fake of acting at times. As I mentioned before, he does that added comedy as well. So not the best performance by him, but a serviceable job. You have Cary Elwes, who's Dr. Gordon, so you may know him from things like The Princess Bride.
As you wish.
He's one of the two main recognizable names from this film at the time. His acting was similar to Adam's, where there was times it wasn't that great, times it was okay. He definitely had like 3 or 4 times where he slipped up and threw in an accent there that I imagine wasn't intended. He would say something like the word, he said murder a lot, and he would say murder, and it very much had like kind of that British accent to it. He called Adam a liar at one point. He's like, you're a liar. And it's just, it slips up a little bit in there. It takes you a little bit out of it, but overall, okay. His character change, I question if I buy it. At the beginning, he's very appreciative of Jigsaw, like, oh, this is a really well thought out plan. I'm really level-headed. And then he just snaps. If you want to say his family's involvement in him realizing this is becoming more dire of a situation, I can understand that. So that's where I'll say it's justifiable, but it certainly seems a little odd at times where he goes from being super cool to suddenly going crazy, just yelling all the time and just trying to yank his leg off, ultimately cutting his foot off. And so those two characters, interesting stories for them. Execution could have been a little bit higher, I would say. The second famous actor in this was Danny Glover. He played Detective Tapp. You may know him from things like Predator 2, or more commonly Lethal Weapon is probably what he's most known for.
I'm too old for this.
And I thought he did a really good job. He played that, trying to solve this case situation and really just devoted to this specific case, kind of going full blown, once his partner dies, I need to resolve this. So really good acting when it comes to Danny Glover, I feel like. There were times in here I felt like, not to go on a tangent, but names in this were really weirdly interchangeable. You obviously had Dr. Lawrence Gordon. His wife called him Larry a bunch, and even Adam called him Larry one time. I don't remember him ever being called Larry ever again in any of the movies or by any of the fans. So obviously that's just kind of a variation of the name they could go with. And then similarly, when you had Amanda being talked to by Detective Tapp when he's talking to Amanda about telling her story. He calls her Mandy. And I'm like, I've never heard her called Mandy any other time again. So I don't know if we want to just say they had, these alterations of their names just for those specific scenes, but that was a little bit strange. As far as the supporting cast outside of Gordon, Adam, Detective Tapp, I thought they did a pretty good job. You have Zepp, obviously, who's the one kind of running the game. Overall, a decent job by him. Amanda, I thought did a good job just for that little scene where she gets her trap and her retelling of the story. I thought she did a really good job there. You have Gordon's family. They were okay. I don't know, at times, some of the back and forth between them and Zepp was okay. And then you have Jigsaw. Not a lot of acting. He did most of the voice work for the tapes, obviously, but Tobin Bell is Jigsaw. I know I remember seeing one point that the guy that was in the wire trap was originally considered to be Jigsaw before they wound up going with Tobin Bell. I can't imagine them having anybody other than Tobin Bell. He is the iconic character of John Kramer, so I'm glad they wound up going with him there. So when it comes to execution and acting, I'll say average to maybe above average, just because realizing they had limited budget, limited amount of time to do this. Comes to audio, I really enjoyed the audio here, so I'm going to say great job there. They had really eerie sounds throughout the movie where they're in the bathroom and they're just trying to determine what's going on. They have that very creepy, like, what's happening here? Just background sound effects taking place. There wasn't a whole lot of songs or soundtrack that took place in this movie. I will say, though, Hello Zepp, the audio that plays when Adam realizes that Jigsaw's the guy in the middle of the room, that is my favorite horror soundtrack of all time, just because the buildup of that is so great, and it comes with that twist reveal. So the combination of the audio being amazing and kind of the timing of when it gets presented are just incredible. So audio overall, I would say really good job. Visuals, I will say great for the budget. You had a lot of visuals throughout it that were clear that they were limited in what they could do. I think some of their camera footage were just still photos that they try to use as live feeds. They did the thing that wound up becoming actually extremely popular for the Saw franchise, but they did it originally, I think, because of the limited budget. Whenever there's somebody in a trap or somebody freaking out, they do that really fast camera shaking, especially their head, just going all over the place, just to present that panic or that frenzy that the person's experiencing without having to do a lot of extra camera work. So really good job there. This first movie's not a lot of gore. As I mentioned, there's a few times where you have victims at the beginning, then you have the detective, I guess both detectives who wound up getting impacted there. Overall, I think pretty good job when it comes to those. And then the filters of the camera, interesting flashbacks of the traps. You have kind of that green, grainy filter to it, especially. That became iconic for the Saw franchise as well. So a lot of the lower budget things that they needed to do wound up becoming really staples and becoming recognizable as real positives for the franchise. So interesting to see how when you have only so much to work with, you wind up being a lot more creative and coming up with things that wind up being really successful. I saw a few other things about camera work and cinematography where, Gordon's supposed to be level-headed, Adam's supposed to be shaky, so whenever they filmed one of them, the camera was a little bit different. I didn't necessarily notice that, but it was interesting to hear that that was potentially thought about just to replicate their personalities. Apparently this was all over-the-shoulder cameras as well, so incredible that they had such a steady camera since there wasn't any tripods or anything more stationary that was utilized. Then at the end, you get the flashbacks of previous footage and then some new footage that was there but we didn't see. So a lot of recycling of things, but doing it in a way that didn't seem overly obnoxious or unnecessary. Really great job for the visuals. Fun factor, this is my fifth one here. I'm gonna say this one's amazing. At the time this came out, everybody was blown away with what took place with this film. I kind of saw the guy in the middle having some impact into the story there, but ultimately the reveal of that and just the impact this film had on the industry as a whole. You get things that have come after that are definitely influenced by Saw and the entire Saw franchise. So I really enjoy this film. I know, as I mentioned, there's not the greatest acting. Plot of the movie, the execution of the movie, the visuals, the audio, I feel like I personally enjoy it. I'm gonna give this an 8 out of 10. In the past, I probably would have said something a lot higher, but trying to be realistic with how good this film was and the limitations that they did have, 8 out of 10 feels like a great spot for it, just because really excellent film. There were some things that could have been improved, but as far as just the impact across the board, really great film. So that's my thoughts on Saw. Let me know your guys' thoughts down in the comments below. If you'd like me to talk more about the Saw franchise or any other horror franchises, please let me know. I'd love to see your guys' opinions there. Thank you so much for watching. And I'll talk to you again soon. Okay, I know I gave it an 8. No, I can give it a 10. I promise I can give it a 10.
Game over.